What if Bella was adopted by the Volturi at age of 5? Bella, come on. We are going to miss our flight. My mother, Renee, called from across the gate. The entire day, I had been waiting to get on our flight to Italy, and as a 5-year-old, I easily was bored. There had been a long car ride, as well as many long lines. Of course, over the years I had learned to entertain myself, though. Sometimes, I would play games and pretend I was a princess, or I would find patterns in the ceiling. Either way, I never flat out told my parents I was bored out of my mind. For some reason, I thought that people could always find something to do. Recently, I had begun the game of trying to imagine Italy. The only places I had ever been to was Seattle, with Renee for a day. Sadly, we had only gone shopping. I hated shopping. Really, how many outfits did one person need? Also, I had gone to La Push with Charlie, to go fishing. Why was it that every time I left Forks, we did something I didn't want to do? However, I never complained. Happily, I would sit on the beach, with Rachel and Rebecca, my best friends in the whole wide world. Rachel and Rebecca's little brother, Jacob, liked to play with us too. Sometimes. But he was only 3, so we didn't like to play with him as much. I had actually asked Rachel where Italy was, because Rachel was in the 3rd grade, and much older than us. Mommy had said it was across the Atlantic Ocean, but that didn't mean much to me at the time. However, Rachel had never even heard of Italy. So, when I had gotten home, I had immediately found the map my daddy had in his study. There, I had discovered very little. Just that Italy was far away from Forks, Washington. Now, we were on the way there. We had spent the morning driving to Seattle to catch our flight. On the way, I had questioned my parents endlessly on where we were going. What was it like? Why are we going? Patiently, my parents had answered every single question. Daddy had won a trip to Italy because he was a police chief. Apparently, there had been some kind of drawing with all of the police chiefs in the state of Washington, and Charlie had won. Italy was a very pretty place. And I would like it a lot. We were going to a place called Venice, then Volterra, before going to Rome and heading home. The trip would last a total of 1 week, and I couldn't have been more excited. My parents had said that Venice was a city completely on water. So, to pass the time, I pretended I was a mermaid, and lived under the water city. I found it very hard to imagine a city on water. Were all of the houses on boats? I refused to ask my parents, thinking that would spoil the surprise. Finally, we had reached the airport after hours of being in the car. Or, so it seemed to me. Time seemed to be a funny thing. When you really wanted something to come, it had a way of taking longer. For me, I really wanted to get to the airport. I had never been on a plane before, and was excited to fly for the first time. Sure, I had seen airplanes in my life, but had never actually gotten to be in one for myself. When we first arrived to check in, Daddy had lifted all of the suitcases out of the car. While I held onto Mommy's hand, I had watched Charlie closely, making sure he got mine out of the trunk of the car. Mommy had insisted I have princesses on mine, though I really didn't care. I found it more exciting to pretend I was the princess, rather than watch movies about other ones. Again, we had to wait. I had stood in the long check-in line with my parents, all the while playing with the hem of my dress. I really didn't like wearing dresses, though. They only got in the way of playing princess. When I told Mommy that, however, she said that princesses always wore dresses. Why? I preferred that princesses wore normal clothes, so they could swing and play tag easily. Renee said that princesses went to dances and teas. At the time, though, I couldn't come up with a good excuse. So, reluctantly, I had been forced into the dress. However, not even my mom could ever get me to wear tights. I hated them, even for ballet. See, Mom had recently enrolled me in dance classes, probably trying to make me less clumsy. I, however, didn't think that would ever happen. I tripped over thin air. How was I going to be able to dance at all? Unfortunately for me, I had already been enrolled, and had to go. So, at 6 o'clock that first Monday, I had been pushed into the ballet classroom. I had been forced into a little pink tutu, and my hair up into a bun. I didn't like it at all. Why couldn't I ever wear normal clothes? Either way, I had spent the next hour falling and tripping everywhere. Miss Lynn, my dance instructor, was trying to teach us some ballet exercise. Basically, I had to stand on one foot, and point my toe. To all of the other girls in the class, the move had been easy. However, to me, I had just fallen on my face. Mom had picked me up, covered in bruises, when I told her I would never be coming back to ballet class. Finally, we made it to the front of the line and checked our luggage in. "Your flight boards in 1 hour, sir," I heard the man behind the counter tell Charlie. Another hour. At that moment, however, my stomach growled loudly. A blush immediately rose to my cheeks when everyone turned to stare. Renee, however, just chuckled. "Looks like someone is hungry," she said, smiling as she led me up an escalator toward the gate. "Once we get through security we can get you something to eat," she told me. I nodded, smiling. Hopefully we could eat at McDonald's. Or somewhere where I could get some chicken nuggets. Again, my stomach growled at the thought of food. I put my hand over it, telling it to be quiet. However, I didn't think my stomach would ever listen to me. Security turned out to be a long line with guards in black. Upon seeing the place, I shied into my mommy. The men looked scary because, unlike Charlie, they didn't seem happy at all. They all looked mad, like they would actually hurt someone. I spent the next 10 minutes keeping my eyes sealed shut, avoiding looking at the security guards. However, when I had to pass through the metal detector, I had to do so alone. I all but ran through, trying to get back to my parents. To my relief, though, the guard just laughed. Maybe they weren't so bad after all. Now I was at McDonald's. And Renee was calling me. Daddy and I had gone through the line and ordered my chicken, my stomach growling the whole time. "Here you go," I finally heard the lady at the counter say, while she handed me my Happy Meal. In this case, the meal really did make me happy. I had forgotten to eat breakfast in our hurry to leave the house, and it was almost noon. Tearing open the white bag, I pulled out my chicken nuggets and threw one into my mouth. Munching on the food, I grabbed my dad's hand and together we walked toward the plane. I was sure this would be a vacation I would never forget. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now landing in Rome, Italy. Thanks you very much for joining us and have a wonderful stay. The flight attendant's voice rang out through the intercom with an almost robotic tone. Though I had enjoyed flying immensely, the inhuman quality of the flight attendants perturbed me. Perturbed. My word of the day. While we had been on the flight, Daddy had been teaching me some larger words. And my goal was to be able to use them in everyday sentences. Together, we had started reading a new series, with thicker books. Though I was young, I enjoyed reading immensely, in fact. It was my favorite hobby. However, on our extremely long flight, it had taken my entire collection of books I had brought for the trip to keep me occupied. Also, I had decided that lanes were not the best place in the world to sleep. I had spent most of the dark hours tossing and turning on my chair, trying to fall asleep. Sadly, it didn't work out so well. So, here I was. Hair messed up, rubbing my eyes, and listening to the robot lady tell how she loved having us on the plane. I doubted it. The lady in question had been one of those fussy old ladies who must always have everything perfect and in her control. Unfortunately for me, I had gotten on her bad side very early into the trip. About an hour after we had taken off, which for me had been really scary because I didn't like things moving very fast. The lady had come by with a cart of drinks. She had moved up the aisle, her hair in a tight bun, reminding me of a strict school teacher from the stories. Through the squished space between the uncomfortable seats, she had pushed her silver cart made of metal. Having never been on an airplane before, I didn't know what the cart held, yet I was afraid to wake my dad to ask him. Charlie had fallen asleep after the first hour of reading together. His snores are probably what kept the entire cabin awake for most of the night. Apparently, the flight attendant didn't enjoy his snores, either. For when she had come by, she had thrown him a mean look before noticing me. With judging eyes she had stared at me, while I internally cowered under her gaze. Even so, my head held high and looked her straight in the eye, though inside I wanted to crawl in my own little corner with my head under a pillow. Where was Renee? I wondered as the flight lady observed me. I knew I was most likely the youngest traveler on the plane, but the way she looked at me was almost terrifying. What had I done to her? However, Mommy was nowhere to be found. Across the aisle, I noticed her empty seat. She had most likely gone to the restroom, leaving me with Charlie, the daddy who was sitting next to me, snoring up a storm. Then a thought struck me: what if the flight lady was just having a bad day? Maybe she couldn't fix her lipstick this morning, which was why it was bright red and smeared on her lips. Why did people do that? I noticed that grandparents liked bright red lipstick, but all it did was leave a nice, bright print on your cheeks when they kissed them. Then, once the grandchild was out of sight, they would desperately rub at the lipstick, praying that it would come off. No kid likes to have lipstick all over his cheeks. Yes, that explained everything. The lady had been mad this morning because of her lipstick. So, if that was the only reason she was acting angry at me, I had nothing to worry about. Finally, I spoke, because my throat was really dry just looking at the cans of soda I could now see through the partially opened drawers. "Excuse me," I asked the lady. Though she was staring right at me, I doubted whether she would have paid attention to the words coming out of my mouth. When the lady shook her head rapidly to make herself focus, I realized she had completely spaced out for the time being. No wonder she had stared at me so long. "Oh, yes sweetie," she asked in a completely innocent tone. It was the type of voice people use when they really hate a gift, but are pretending to like it. Basically, it was a completely fake charade. Not like the game I liked, but an act. Perhaps I could ask Mommy if we could play charades when she came back. Right now, though, I needed to talk to the flight lady. "May I please have a Sprite?" I asked her, copying the fake voice. I, too, could pretend to be an angel when I wanted to. In fact, I was the best in the family at playing charades. When I played with Rebecca and Rachel, I was always the winner. They said it was just because I was a good actor. The lady in front of me simply frowned, though she complied with my request. Complied was also a new word Charlie had taught me. I glanced back over at my father, sprawled out in his seat, as he gave a particularly loud snore. I shook my head. Why couldn't Daddy be quiet? Looking back at the lady, I saw that she had already poured my drink into a plastic cup, and was handing it to me. However, when I reached for it, I accidentally knocked it over, making it fall right onto her red skirt, getting it completely soaked. The lady almost shrieked. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," I told the lady in my sweetest 5-year-old voice, while the lady was desperately trying to wipe the sticky soda off of her straight skirt. The voice didn't work this time. Instead, the lady stormed off down the aisle, her librarian bun swishing as she walked. Perhaps that would be a good name for her, the librarian. A few hours later, it had come time for dinner. To my dismay, it was the librarian who was delivering dinner. Once she reached my seat, she handed me the frozen inedible dinner. Seriously, did they make the food out of plastic? And why did the airlines think people would like cheese-stuffed chicken? Though her foods were somewhat eccentric, my mommy had taught me how to cook some meals. I had to be careful not to burn myself, but even I could make dinners better than these. I had not even touched my food the entire time. Though I was hungry, I preferred to eat the crackers I had packed with my books. Finally, it was time for dessert, and I convinced myself there would be something good. Part of me knew I would only get my hopes up to be disappointed. Imagine my surprise, though, when chocolate chip cookies were on the menu. So when the librarian came by asking me what I wanted, I immediately replied a cookie. When she came back, however, she brought with her a oatmeal raisin cookie, a type one didn't like at all. With pleading eyes, I had asked her if there were any more chocolate chip ones. To my dismay, she had told me there weren't any more left. Behind me, the person asked for a chocolate chip cookie, however, and I waited for the librarian's reply. However, instead of refusing the old man, the lady had gone and brought back a chocolate chip cookie for him. To say I was mad was an understatement. Angry tears began to form in my eyes. Although I was upset, I held the tears back, refusing to cry. I officially hated the librarian. Now, we were leaving the plane, thankfully. Happily, I had gathered my book collection as I jumped off the stiff blue seats. Finally, I was able to stretch my legs. I had hated sitting for so long, it just wasn't like me. Most of my time I spent playing, not sitting for so long. Although I did like reading, I had already read and reread my books I had brought. While we were here, I would have to make sure Mommy and Daddy took me to buy some new ones. "Come on, sweetie," Renee said next to me, grabbing my hand. "Let's go." With Charlie behind us we began the walk through the now crowded walkway. As I held on tightly to my books. "Bella, here, let me put your books back in the suitcase," Daddy said, holding out his hand for the books. Thinking, I glanced down at the bag of heavy books in my hand, before handing them out for Charlie to put in the bag. Despite the fact that I didn't want to be parted with my books, I knew Daddy would keep them safe. "Bella, are you excited? We are in Italy," Renee was chattering about, clearly so happy that we were in Italy. After the long trip, we were finally here. As we clambered through the aisle, I began to skip. Soon, we would be in the City of Water, as I had nicknamed Venice. And I was thrilled. As we exited the plane, the pilots and flight attendants were lined up, saying goodbye to the passengers. Passing by them, I saw the librarian. My face immediately formed a frown. However, I then noticed her skirt was still stained from when I spilled my drink. Satisfied, I continued my skipping off the plane, excited for the vacation. Rubbing my eyes to ward off any remainders of the uncomfortable sleep I had just had, I looked around at the airport. Almost all of the signs were written in Italian, making them impossible to read. At this moment, Renee, Charlie and I were headed to baggage claim, before taking a train to Venice. According to them, it was impossible to reach Venice by any other way but boat or train. There were no cars to be found in the entire city. For me, it was hard to imagine a place without cars. Did people simply walk everywhere? Their feet must have gotten tired at some point. And how did the buildings not flood over with water? 1, 2, 3. I heard Renee mumbling to herself as she led me by the hand past some large silver ovals in the middle of the baggage claim area. I assumed these were where the bags came out, though I was unable to know if that was the truth or not at the moment. Judging by the way people were crowded around them, I assumed I was correct. Here we are, Renee, Charlie said from behind us, still carrying my butterfly suitcase along. As he said the words, I looked up to see a large white 4 above the silver oval in front of us. Without hesitation, he led us through the swarms of people, before stopping at the edge of the silver object from which I hoped our baggage would soon come. Around me, people were busy chatting on their cell phones, or yelling to a family member on the other side of the place. In here, it was almost impossible to hear my own thoughts with the volume at which people were talking. To my left, there was a lady, probably in her early 20s. Glancing at her watch while tapping her foot impatiently, I could tell from her face she was certainly younger than Mommy and Daddy, though they were both younger than 30. Mommy had just had her 25th birthday about a week ago. Daddy and I had surprised her with a party. It had been our little secret. Daddy was going to take her down to La Push, where we had a birthday set up for her. Mommy was always at the house, so she would have found out if we had planned the party at our house. So, on Saturday, Charlie had taken me over to Billy's house where Rebecca, Rachel and I had worked on the decorations. Rachel had found some old streamers and together the three of us had covered their entire house in ribbon. Rebecca, however, had still thought the place was missing something, so, without further ado, she had raced upstairs leaving Rachel and I wondering about her weird behavior. It hadn't been a long wait, though, because Rebecca had rushed downstairs, arms decked with colored paper a moment later. Apparently, Rebecca had learned how to make paper chains at school during arts and crafts. So, the next 3 hours were spent folding and gluing paper. By the time we were done, all that was left of the living room was paper chains connecting to all of the walls along with the colorful streamers. Then had come the cake. Thankfully, Billy had known better than to trust 3 little girls with an oven. So we had bought a cake at a local store. Of course, all of the adults just pretended they thought we made it when the party actually came. Finally the guests had shown up, bringing with them balloons and presents for my mother. When the time had arrived, all of the guests had huddled behind vacant couches and doors, watching for my mother to open the door. In her mind, we simply going to have dinner with Billy and his family. Boy was she wrong. As she had stepped through the door, we had all sprung out and yelled, "Surprise!" Needless to say, she was shocked. Rebecca, Rachel, and I had then appointed ourselves as the best party givers in all of Washington. I would miss them in the next 2 weeks, but that was about the only thing I would miss from Forks. To be honest, I was not a fan of the green and cold. Wet weather simply did not suit me. Beep beep beep. A loud buzzing sound rang out, forcing me to cover my ears. What was the loud noise? At the same moment, the silver rounder began turning, bringing large bags of luggage with it. The lady next to us lifted her sunglasses and began searching for her luggage. Charlie and Renee both were looking for our bags as well. Something was strange about the lady next to me, though. Wearing plain jeans and a tight white top, I noticed her outfit fit her perfectly. Maybe she was a model or something. Her hair also was shinier than any person's I had ever seen. It fell in perfect curls to the center of her back, flawlessly. When she raised her sunglasses, though, I realized what I had noticed off about her. Her eyes, the red, blood-colored orbs were searching aimlessly for her luggage. Apparently this rounder held luggage from multiple flights, for I would have known if I had seen this person before. But was person the right word? Never had I been superstitious, though Billy often was. Rebecca, Rachel and I often joked about their father's crazy stories. However, at this moment I wondered if there might have been some truth to the thought that mythical creatures exist. Never in my life had I given credence to the thought, but standing here now, a shiver found its way up my spine just by her eyes. The skin of the lady, too, was paler than I had ever seen. Coming from the girl who people wondered if she was part albino, it meant something for me to say she was pale. I, too, had white skin, but hers looked almost clear. Like there was not even skin there, like if I reached out to touch her I wouldn't feel skin, but something different. It scared me. The very presence of the person next to me filled me with sheer terror. Hesitantly, I took a couple steps away, hoping not to be noticed. "There it is," I heard Mom say next to me, as a large black bag came by. With a great tug, Charlie pulled the suitcase off of the luggage conveyor before placing it on the ground next to me. "Here, Bells, watch over this one," Dad told me with a grin. As he spoke, I immediately made it my personal goal to watch that suitcase like a hawk. All the while, though, I kept shooting glances at the strange woman a few paces away from me. Her sunglasses had been lowered, shielding her eyes from me again. For a moment, I doubted whether she knew if anyone had seen them. Perhaps they were just contacts. Of course they are Bella. It isn't possible for a person to have red eyes. Yes, they were just contacts, nothing more. However, it wasn't long before our second and last suitcase was found as well, meaning that it was time to go. Only barely was I able to keep from letting out a sigh of relief. Finally we could get out of here. Though I knew there wasn't something actually wrong with the model person next to me, I didn't want to be in her presence any longer than I absolutely had to. "Come on, sweetie," Renee told me, once again grabbing my hand as we maneuvered between the countless people who were paying no attention to what they were doing. I didn't need any more incentive. I wanted to get out of here. Instinctively, I crouched closer to my mommy, trying to make sure I wouldn't get lost. If I did, it would be very hard to find my parents again in this mess. The last thing I would want to do would be to lose track of my parents. Especially when people like that woman were near. When I looked back though, the lady was gone, she had vanished without a trace. Before long, though, we had Ray checked the front doors where we would be getting a taxi to take us to the train station to Venice. Apparently, it wasn't a long ride, for which I was grateful. I had spent too much time traveling in my opinion. Once we reached the doors, my dad hailed a taxi. Much to my surprise, however, the car wasn't bright yellow with white and black checkers on it. It was a simple black car, unlike those taxis in movies. A kind-faced man came from around the front to help my dad put the luggage in the back while Mom and I hopped inside. All the while, my thoughts kept turning back toward the women from the baggage claim. Who was she? Or was the better question different? What was she? Call it a feeling of foreboding, or a foreshadow. Somehow, though, I didn't think that was the last time I would see her. It was unreasonable, I knew. Besides her looks, she was simply ordinary. Nothing whatsoever was wrong with her. But I knew, instinctively, that thought was a lie. The taxi drive was short, thankfully. My quota for traveling had already been fulfilled, for the rest of my life. Patience was a quality a person needed to have if they were traveling long distances, but unfortunately for me it was a trait I didn't possess. I mean, how could a person actually like sitting in one spot for hours on end, looking out at views which they would forget in about 5 minutes? To me, the entire idea seemed pointless. I am sure many people would have loved to be looking out the window right now, watching. Despite that fact, though, I still couldn't help but want to be asleep. However, even I couldn't help but feel amazed as I passed a huge landmark on the right side of the car. To me, it looked like a giant brown oval, with many holes in it. Never had I seen something so ancient. I could tell, from the look of the place that it was probably thousands of years old. My mouth dropped open as I gazed at the stone which looked as though it had seen much better days. Tourists were swarming from every direction, just affirming my opinion that this place in front of me was very famous. All signs of sleep forgotten for the moment, I turned to Charlie. "Daddy, what is that place?" I asked my dad next to me as we passed the place. To say it was gigantic didn't seem strong enough. My eyes were wide as I examined its every detail. My eyebrows creased as I saw that one side seemed to be made of bricks, like it had been somewhat repaired. Of course, after thousands of years I was surprised it was still standing. Charlie, upon seeing my expression, let out a chuckle. That, Bells, is the Colosseum. Not much more could be said, though. For the light we had stopped at was now green, and the Colosseum was passing around the corner. Dad, however, had taken it upon him to give me a history lesson. It was built by the ancient Romans in. At that point I tuned out. Sleep was again knocking at my doorstep. Thinking that I couldn't see any other view equal to the one I had just seen, I closed my eyes and let my head rest against the taxi door. I didn't think I was ever completely unconscious, more like I was in between sleep and reality. Though I was not completely aware of my surroundings, I could make out vague voices in the background. Such as, from time to time I could hear Renee ask about a particular place or Charlie question some random fact. Other than that, however, I simply led up against the black interior of the car, yawning contentedly. I was almost like a small kitten, happy just to be able to curl in a ball and rest. My much-needed nap was short-lived, it seemed, because it wasn't long before the cab driver spoke again. "Here we are," the cab driver said with a strong accent as we pulled into the train station. I sighed, before sitting up, stretching. Less than 4 hours of sleep was not enough for me. Maybe I could convince Charlie and Renee to let me go straight to the hotel once we reached Venice. The train station loomed in front of me as I stepped out of the taxi door. To my left there was another McDonald's, just like at the airport. Even I couldn't help but chuckle. It seemed the entire world loved fast food just as much as Americans, for the line was out the door. "Come on, baby, let's go," Mom said, grabbing my hand while Charlie took care of the luggage. Renee looked down at me sympathetically, seeing how tired I was. "We can go to sleep soon, honey," she said again, while I nodded. Another yawn found its way out of my mouth as I struggled to retain consciousness. Together, we began the ascent up the staircase, though we waited at the top for Charlie. Once Dad was done getting the bags, the three of us found our way through the crowded train station. It almost reminded me of the airport, though there were rows of trains rather than departure gates. All around us people were bustling around, trying to make it to their own gate. Cell phones rang, people called their loved ones over to them. Yes, it was exactly like an airport. However, one sound was different, the whistles. Whistles sang from every corner of the place, alerting the passengers of a near departure. Renee was now double-checking all of the bags before I heard a lady make an announcement over the speakers. "Attention all passengers, train 6 to Venice is departing in 1 minute." Above me, I heard a sound I associated with wind rustling as dozens of wooden numbers and letters flipped over, revealing a new name of a city and a number, the destination and train number. A smile worked its way across my face. I liked the boards better than the electronic numbers they had at airports. Perhaps it was just because I liked old-fashioned things. However, it seemed there were more important things at the moment than the list of platforms and stations. "Bells, come on," Charlie said, grabbing my hand and pulling me along. "Our train is about to leave." Never had I seen Charlie so flustered. He was always the calm one in the family. He was the police chief who was always cool and collected. He had to be because of his job. Now, however, I could see the worry faint upon his face. Renee, too, looked nervous about missing the train. "Charlie, which train did the lady say?" "The tickets are in the suitcase." "Okay, scratch that." Mom was close to panicking. "We cannot miss this train." Yep, she was panicking. Platform 6, I think," Charlie said, his eyebrows creased as How he was worried on whether the answer was correct or not. Or maybe it was how scary Renee looked at this moment. Often, I found it was hard to think straight if someone was pressuring you for an answer. It was like one was being interrogated. "Then what are you waiting for? Come on," Renee practically yelled at us as we began a full-out sprint to the platform in question. The crowds of people looked at us as though we were crazy as we rushed toward the gate. From the numbers as we passed the trains, it seemed as though it went from last to first if you entered from the right side. So, instead of starting at platform 1, we were starting from platform 20. Brilliant. "Excuse me, pardon me." Charlie was mumbling out apologies as we raced past the trains. In the distance we could hear the FAI-NT whistle, which meant a train was about to leave. Again, we picked up the pace. "Come on," Renee yelled, whipping her head around to look at us. She beckoned us with her hand as she ran faster. We all knew there wasn't much time left. And these trains didn't wait for anyone. Worried, I looked up to see which gate we were at. A shining white tent flew past me as Renee stopped and scooped me up, allowing us to go faster. The clock was ticking. I had to admire my parents. Most people would have given up by now. Especially poor Charlie, the guy who never ran, who was now sprinting with 3 bags on him through the train station. 9, 8, 7, the numbers kept flashing as we ran toward our destination. I let out a sigh of relief when we reached the large white 6. My worries were not over yet, though. It seemed, for the announcer came on again at that moment. Train 6 to Venice is now departing. My heart plummeted in my stomach as I heard the words. "Let's go," Charlie said, fierce Dieterme. Nation in his voice as another whistle began to sound. My eyes wide, I watched as Renee ran the last few steps toward the train and hopped in. The luggage and Charlie, however, were not on board. From the end of the cabin, a man jumped down and began to help Dad throw the pieces of luggage on board, where Renee attempted to catch them. From outside, I could hear multitudes of doors shutting as once again the whistle sounded out. "Daddy," I cried out as the train began to move, the wheels turning, making its way down the track. Charlie looked frantic, but threw the last piece of luggage in before hopping on board the train, which was now gaining speed. With a leap, the man who had been helping Charlie jumped on the train and slammed the door shut. All 4 of us were breathing heavily as the train made its way out of the station. My heart was pounding furiously, so I attempted to calm down. I made my way over to an empty seat, keeping my eyes averted from everyone while my parents finish putting the luggage in the storage compartments. "Never make me do that again," I told Renee and Charlie seriously as they came and sat down next to me. Another yawn escaped me as I lay my head on the blue seat next to me. My eyes seemed to shut of their own accord, for how long I didn't know. How many more adventures would I have? The thought haunted me as I succumbed to sleep. 3 days and X hours later found me in the middle of the packed city square of Volterra, Italy with my parents. The past couple of days in Venice had been some of the best in my life. I now considered Venice my favorite place in the world. The food was amazing, in fact I had never tasted better pasta than I had while in Venice. However, all too soon it seemed like we had to continue on our journey. Not that I was complaining. I was excited to see the rest of Italy. While in Venice, I had actually gotten to ride a gondola, one of the things I had always seen pictures of. We had spent the nights at a fancy hotel with actual room keys. Unlike the electronic keys used at other hotels. To put it simply, it had been an almost surreal experience. I would always remember it. So, it was in quiet dismay we had boarded a taxi boat back to the airport. For none of us had wished to leave. Unlike my previous thoughts, Venice had not been like a city of buildings floating everywhere, though I was right about flooding problems. Then again, in a city built on water that was to be expected. The first floors of many of the houses had long since been evacuated for that very reason. Now many people resided on their upper floors. Transportation was something I found interesting, for since there were no cars, people used boats to get from place to place. Taxis, cars, even buses were all boats of different sizes. If we ever came again, I would surely want to spend some more time in Venice. Currently, Charlie, Renee and I were located in the city square of Volterra, a square which reminded me so much of the one in Venice. See, while in St. Mark's Square in Venice, I had discovered the joy of feeding birds. The little black animals could be found in swarms in front of the clock tower which loomed at the front of the square, directly across from the main canal of Venice. In the shadow of the golden clock, I had spent hours feeding the black birds with a piece of bread from a local restaurant. Laughing happily, I had spent the majority of the afternoon watching the birds peck contentedly at the crumbs on my hands. Renee had taken tons of pictures as I had held 3 birds on my hands at once, for all tea. Animals had flocked toward the food the moment my palm was in the air. However, the funniest incident occurred when Charlie wasn't looking. Armed with the last piece of bread, I had placed the RSEL on the center of Charlie's dark hair. Immediately, 2 birds had jumped straight to his shoulders fighting to get the lump of food. Giggling, I watched while Charlie swatted at the 2 birds now pulling on his hair. It was completely hopeless. The 2 birds had gripped onto his shirt and wouldn't budge though Charlie was jumping around as though on a bed of flaming coals. Luckily, Renee had the entire incident on camera to be remembered for years to come. The police chief who was afraid of birds, who would have thought? Certainly any person who got in hold of that tape would have blackmail on him for eternity. Now, however, the 3 of us were standing at the edge of a long purple rope which stretched all the way down the square until it reached the road. With bated breath, we waited to find some clue of what was going on. For an hour or so ago, a police officer had roped off a pathway through the center of the square, coinciding with the sidewalk of the road about a quarter-mile down. Curiously, we had watched as crowds began to accumulate, with everyone attempting to get as close to the purple rope as possible. Above me, the clock tower struck noon, signaling the middle of the day. In awe, tourists, including myself, had watched as the bells hit their melodious notes. All eyes were looking toward the golden face of the tower, complete with 24 numerals rather than the 12 I was accustomed to. Across the street, a police officer began to urge crowds to stop shoving as they fought to get closer toward the rope. What was going on? Around us, people began to become more squished as they inched in cramped spaces trying to sneak a view of the makeshift road. I pulled on Renee's jeans, hoping she would have an answer. "Mommy, what is going on?" Renee simply smiled and swooped me up into her arms so I could look her in the eyes. "It's a parade, sweetie," she told me, her eyes twinkling in excitement. Renee always did have a flair for parties and festivals and whatnot. Once, she even had the group of us celebrate the French storming of the Bastille Day, though no one in our family was French. We had also celebrated Cinco de Mayo and Hanukkah, though neither holiday really applied to us. It was simply something Renee enjoyed doing. So, I wasn't surprised she was happy about a parade. I had always wanted to go to a parade, but I had never actually been to one. They had always sounded like so much fun to go to. How could a person not like watching pretty balloons and flowers and all of the decorative floats? I had once seen a parade of television, so it had been my dream to actually see one. Soon, I was just as excited as Renee. At the time I had watched the parade on television, it had been Christmas. So what were they celebrating? Again, I decided to ask Renee. If anyone in the family knew about a particular holiday, it would be her. To my shock, though, she had no idea. When I asked, she simply frowned, having no idea of what the celebration was about. So, without further thought, I decided to ask the person next to me. "Excuse me, miss," I tugged on the lady's dress as I spoke. Instantly, the lady stooped down to my level, looking disgruntled at having to crinkle her pin-straight skirt. She was wearing the outfit a normal secretary would wear, complete with the button-up shirt, high heels, and hair perfectly curled around her face. Her green eyes looked quizzically at my own, wondering why I had bothered her. Even I could see the disgruntled look beneath her dark features. I knew what had to be done. Immediately, I flashed on my cutest face. Though it was the same face the librarian had not been fooled by, it had only ever failed me that one time. Apparently, this lady was one who could be swayed slightly. "Yes, honey," I heard the lady reply in a sweet voice. I flashed her a smile, widening my eyes as I batted my eyelashes. Sometimes, I just had to pretend I was a little angel to get people to pay attention to me. It seemed today was one of those times. "Would you happen to know what the celebration is for?" I asked again, continuing with the cute voice. The lady's eyebrows creased together as she pondered me. It was just a simple question, wasn't it? "Well, today is St. Marcus Day," the secretary lady said sweetly, though her voice quaked as she spoke. Perhaps it came from having a police chief as my father, but it seemed as though she was hiding something. To anyone else, I doubted though they would have thought anything was suspicious, but I had a bad feeling about this person. "What does that mean?" I asked again, wondering who in the world St. Marcus was. I had certainly never heard of him. Again, the lady looked slightly flustered, but I shook it off as her shivering in the cold. Looking up, I noticed slight clouds were gathering. The sun had been completely shielded from view. "Well, St. Marcus Day is to honor all of the policemen who keep this city safe." I glowed, just like my dad. Maybe Forks should have a St. Charlie Day, to honor all of the policemen of Forks. If anyone deserved it, Charlie did. Glancing back at Charlie, I realized how underappreciated he was. Every day, he risked his life to keep Forks safe. Just like the policemen of Volturi. Yes, I definitely like this holiday. And if we had a St. Charlie Day, maybe I could ride on one of the floats. I wouldn't want to be on the top, but maybe somewhere on the side. Or the back. Then again, maybe I could just look at the floats. Knowing me, I would probably find a way to stop the entire parade by falling or something. Turning back to the lady, I asked her another question. "So, was this St. Marcus a policeman?" I smiled widely at her, however, she didn't seem too happy with the course of this conversation. Anxiously, she was playing with the hem of her shirt, though she attempted to remain composed. In fact, besides playing with her shirt, she seemed to be pretty in control of her emotions. Why would she be nervous though? I thought it was a pretty simple question. Yes or no was all that was necessary. Well, the lady was tripping over her words. No, he wasn't, but he did help protect the city. She seemed proud of herself for her explanation. For a satisfied smile rested on her face. So, what was he? I asked. Maybe he was a soldier. Or perhaps he was a warrior. What all could he be if he protected the city? However, the lady didn't answer. I waited for a few moments and was about to open my mouth to speak again, when sirens began in the distance. Around me, people began to clap as they looked down, turning their heads, trying to spot the police in the distance. Ducking my head under the rope, I began to see two faint police motorcycles in the distance. Charlie tapped me on the back before leaning down to whisper, "Here, it's about to start." It appeared Renee and I weren't the only ones excited after all. I couldn't blame him though. An entire parade, just for policemen. I smiled as I saw the happiness on Charlie's face, seeing everyone clap for the policemen as the motorcyclists made their way down the road. More cheers. Far down the road, I could see a police car float coming down with huge blue balloons on it. Joining in with the others, I began to clap loudly, cheering on the police officers. However, a sound next to me made me forget about the parade for the moment. Gianna, not far from us, I could see a lady walking toward the women next to me. The secretary whipped her head around toward the newcomer as she strutted forward. Dressed in a tight outfit and boots so tall I was surprised. Said a person could actually not trip in them, came a tall blonde model. As though she ruled the country, the blonde strutted forward, like she was on a runway. With that outfit, she would have fit right in place. Green sequins covered the entirety of the small top she wore, while skinny jeans fell in place right below. By the way she carried herself, I was actually surprised she wasn't wearing fishnets. Between her and the secretary, whose name was apparently Gianna, there could be no comparison. While one was tall and beautiful, if somewhat trashy, the other was conservative and well, ordinary. However, it seemed the two knew each other well, a fact I would never have guessed. "Come on." The model beckoned Gianna toward her while flicking her perfect waves behind her. Ever so slightly, she raised her sunglasses, attempting to fix a stray strand of hair. The model was all too familiar. "I am coming," Gianna all but whispered next to me, even I barely heard it. If she thought the blonde heard it from way over there, she was mistaken. To my shock, though, the model gave her a look to which Gianna shrugged. Now that was weird. As Gianna walked through the crowd, which had now created a space in front of the mesmerizing blonde, she kept her head low. It was though she was almost submissive to this person. It would take someone blind, though, not to see the affect this model had on people. "Excuse me, people, but could you all move a little more?" The blonde told the tourists who had now all but forgotten the parade, though it seemed my parents had not noticed the girl. Maybe it was just because of their excitement at this particular parade. In an instant, the people began shuffling backward, anxious to obey the blonde. Her presence was stunning, almost dazzling as she glanced around. Still, I kept coming back to the thought that I was missing something important. I knew I had seen this person before. However, it wasn't until she raised her sunglasses did I see them. Her eyes, piercing red. This was the lady from the airport, the lady whom I never wanted to see again. How could I have missed it? Granted she had been dressed differently then, but still. Now, though, it was painfully obvious who she was. A shiver ran up my spine again upon seeing her eyes, her unnatural eyes which seemed to send a warning out just by the color. Although her sunglasses had been raised for only a split second, I had seen. However, it seemed no one else had. Or else they weren't concerned. Like little puppies they seemed to want to follow her every command. Something just wasn't right here. And I was going to find out what. Looking up, I noticed the parade had started, receiving Charlie and Renee's full attention. It was now or never. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to extend to you a special offer today," the model said, as the tourists drank in her every word. It was like she was hypnotizing them or something. "We at the Castle of Volterra tour guides I'd like to offer a special tour of the Castle of Volterra, which it is rumored Saint Marcus himself once lived in." When the model said this, the group of people began to talk excitedly to another about this new idea. I, however, kept my eyes focused on the secretary and the model who were now exchanging small smiles. Well, the secretary almost looked like she was trying to smile, but couldn't exactly. Okay, what was going on? Why are you offering this to us? A random tourist in a yellow shirt asked the model, scratching his head. It was a good question, apparently, for almost everyone waited for the answer. The model just smiled sweetly, like she had been expecting this question. Well, as it is St. Marcus Day, the benefactors like to have a special tour for those in the city, just as OU. Our way to contribute to this historic day in the history of Volterra. The answer seemed to appease the tourists for the moment, but before long another spoke up. How much is it going to cost? The lady in pale blue asked, checking her purse to count the money in it. Why, it's absolutely free, the model announced. As I said, it is Volterra Castle's way of celebrating this momentous day. Now came the swarm, everyone wanted to go. Well, who wouldn't? People pushed toward the front, trying to get close to the pair who it seemed would be leading the tour. Please, no pushing, you can all come. Maybe it was just me. But the tone of her voice sent shivers up my spine. Suddenly I did not want to go on this tour. Then again, I really did want to find out why this model seemed so mysterious. Wanting time to think, I tried to push my way back out of the crowd, but it was too late. I was being swept in with the tide of people. That interference made up my mind for me. I would go on this tour, just to observe. There was something really strange going on here, such as why did this person have red eyes? Why was she so inhumanly beautiful? Why did everyone seem to obey her every wish? I was going to find out the answers. I watched the two closely, as I followed along behind them the best I could. It seemed like they were purposely staying under shaded buildings, though I didn't see why. There wasn't a sun today. That was observation 1. Maybe I needed to keep a running tally of these in my head. All at once, the two stopped in front of an old door. It was the type of door one imagines holding chests of treasure. Or perhaps a dragon behind it. Old, stone, and covered in vines which looked like they had been growing for centuries. Now, this is the door of the weeping, the model said, playing her role as tourists. As she told that this ancient door had a name, camera flashes began going off, as the tourists took pictures of it. I didn't get it though, it was just a door. Who wants to go through a set of pictures just to see lots of stone doors? That would be boring. This door is named that because according to legend, no one who came into this castle ever went out alive. It was like the model was a ghost storyteller. Her voice deepened at just the right spots. Of course, the model added, coming back to reality, that is all just part of the legend. There are actually many legends surrounding this castle, most of which I will hope to tell you through our journey. Turning back to the door, the model stared at the stone slab in front of her. With one hand, she simply pushed it open, to the astonishment of all of us around her. Noticing our shock, the secretary spoke. It was put on a lever years back so that tour guides could open it. I didn't fail to notice the fact that when we walked in, the secretary planted herself firmly in front of the door, not allowing us to touch it or see the lever. Observation number 2. Was there really a lever there? I hadn't seen any hinges or ropes that would have helped lift the door. All the while, the photos just kept snapping. Tourists kept pointing out a certain engraving or impressed the others with their knowledge of the Latin words on the wall as well as the door itself. Right this way, the model spoke, as we headed down a stone corridor. The walls were lit with candles, just like they probably were in the olden days. Now, this is the Hall of the Kings. As in, this was the way to the banquet room, and throne room as well as the library. Now, it seemed the model was hurrying, for she rushed as she told her explanation. Why did it matter how long it took? Coming right along, the model said, walking. The next place we are doing to visit is the banquet room. Something was wrong here, something was terribly wrong. I could feel it, and now it seemed some of the other tourists did too. Is there an exit anywhere? One tourist asked politely. I want to see the parade. The sickly sweet smile on the model's face made me want to run. It made me want to run to the farthest corners of the earth and hide forever from the person in this room. It was at that moment I was acutely aware that Charlie and Renee had no idea where I was. How could I have forgotten them? What would they do when they noticed I was gone? Of course, Renee would probably faint and Charlie would start grabbing anyone in reach and interrogating them. When it came to my safety, Charlie always overreacted. When I first rode a bike he was scared. He made me wear knee pads, and elbow pads, and wrist guards, and a helmet and some other types of pads though football players wore. Now, however, I was in the middle of a foreign country with no one I knew. Oh man, this was not good. Oh, that won't be necessary. The model said persuasively. I am sure you want to continue the tour. Right. The tourist nodded his head, happy to continue the tour. Heidi, Gianna said warningly to the model, who simply shrugged. Was I the only one who noticed that something wasn't right? Or did they just not care? It was like he was under a spell or something. In fact, looking around me, I noticed all of the tourists seemed unconcerned. They had to have noticed what just happened. What on earth had that been? It was like she took away his free will or something. One minute he wanted to leave, and the next he just wanted to stay. Maybe it was just me, but warning signals were flashing, emergency signs. I needed to get out of here. To the banquet hall, everyone. Heidi spoke as the group followed her lead. However, I noticed a wooden door leading off the side and slipped through it. I did not want to go to that ballroom. I could hear the marching of footsteps on the cold stone as the group continued on their way to the ballroom. Hopefully, no one had seen me. My heart, however, I was more concerned about. What if they heard it? It seemed to me like it was going 100 miles an hour with no intent of slowing down. Taking deep breaths, I closed my eyes, willing myself to calm down before I was found. I needed to do something to occupy my time, or Gianna would be headed back here looking for me without warning. Slowly, the thuds seemed to stop as I thought about my days at La Push. Just remembering the piece of the water lapping at the shore. I imagined Rachel and I sitting at the water's edge, laying down as we watched the sunset while Jacob and Rebecca made hot dogs with Charlie and Billy. The sky had been light pink, as the golden orb of the sun had set right above the clear blue water. It seemed my idea had worked, for as I remembered the piece of that day, my heart began to calm down. It was a little janitor's closet, it seemed. Fairly new, I would guess. Perhaps it was once just a corner used to store food or something. Why did it matter? Snap out of it, Bella. I needed to think of a plan. There had to be an exit somewhere. Alright, once I heard the group leave the banquet hall, I would see if that door was still open where we had entered. As I shrunk down to the corner, I curled my knees up to my chest. I wasn't just being paranoid, was I? I mean, had Heidi or Gianna done anything wrong? I shook that question off before, trying to convince myself that I was leaving because of Charlie and Renee. They didn't know where I was. Once they realized I was gone, I shook my head. This was getting me nowhere. By now Charlie probably had already realized I had left. He would have contacted the police and they would be searching for me. Oh, no, the little whisper left my lips as I reached a startling realization: the police were in the parade. Charlie and Renee are probably going ballistic looking for me right now, and they don't have any help. Also, there are swarms of people. They are probably crying and running and so upset because of me. I was a horrible daughter not to tell them where I was going. What was I thinking? However, I was soon given something much worse to think about, as a blood-curdling scream echoed down the hall. Worse than the sound of nails on a chalkboard, the scream sent shivers down my spine and fear into my heart. It was coming from the banquet room. I almost could let out a scream. I needed to do something. Anything would be better than this monotonous waiting, of not knowing what was happening. A feeling of sheer terror was overwhelming me as I did the only thing I could. I plugged my ears. Somehow, I let myself think that if I couldn't hear the screams, then nothing was happening. Normally, I would have started humming. However, at this moment, I doubted any kind of noise would do me any good. Even with my ear plugged, I could still hear them. Soon I began to hear banging fists against the doors, pounding furiously, begging for someone to save them from whatever horrible fate they were meeting. Until one by one, they stopped. Silence. Perhaps even more horrifying than the screams I had just heard was the unbearable silence in which I now sat. I cuddled my knees closer to my chest, my heart pounding furiously, though I begged it to keep quiet, as I hoped not to be discovered. Listening, I was unable to detect even the slightest trace of a sound in that room. No footsteps, not a squeak. Huddled in my corner, I began to create theories on what had happened. Perhaps some giant monster had come, or maybe it was one of those killers seen on television, like the kind my daddy searches for. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't friendly, and I wasn't about to get near enough to it to find out exactly what it was. My breaths came in small gasps, as I tried to stay as small and unmoving as possible. I feared that if I took my breaths in normal paces, I would be found just as quickly as if I had knocked something over. Tears were falling down my cheeks, though I tried not to sob, for fear of causing any type of noise. That was my #1 priority. Don't let anyone hear you. Maybe I could wait until the night and try to escape from this castle or dungeon or whatever it was. Why did I have to run off in the first place? Fear permeated my senses as I heard the most feared sound I had ever listened to. The door was opening. "Marcus, did you hear something?" I heard a man say as I heard the ballroom doorway creak open, just like it had when the tour group had entered. "Please don't let them find me, please don't let them find me." I repeated the words over and over in my head, hoping that somehow the man would leave, without moving down this hallway. "I don't know, Arrow," came the answer from a man thoroughly bored with this man Arrow. It seemed this Arrow person was not appeased, though. As footsteps were now moving down the hard stone floor, my heart beat ever faster, further revealing my place. I was sure the man could hear it, the sound was echoing throughout the little closet. Or at least it seemed to me. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump, was it trying to betray my location? Closer the sound of shoes meeting the stone floor came, after all it was not a long corridor. Until finally the sound stopped right outside the door to my hiding place. I had stopped breathing entirely, though my heart was beating faster than a hummingbird's wings. As I stared at the cold wooden door which barred me from the person right outside it. That brown door was the only thing keeping me hidden. Just less than an inch of wood separating me from whatever terror was waiting for me outside. I hid my head into my knees, compacting the area of space I was taking up, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be spotted if the door was opened. Too late, I realized, the door was opening. A man with translucent skin, exactly like the models, met my eyes as light from the torches fell into the closet. Well, what do we have here?" the man said, reaching out for me with his wrinkly flesh. It looked ancient, as flimsy as paper from an old document. I, however, shied away from his touch, my eyes wide. This was one of the men responsible for the screams I had heard. What if I was next? Now, child, don't be like that." Wrapping his arms around me, he pulled me out of the closet, with me kicking at him to let go. It wasn't any use. It was like kicking a statue of cold marble. I was the only thing getting injured. "OWWW!" I screamed as my foot met his side, resulting in a crack from my toe. As I screamed, the man wrapped his hand around my mouth. The first place his hand had actually met my skin. The cold shocked me. It was like he had dipped his hand in a bucket of ice for hours. However, as soon as his skin met my own, he dropped me to my feet, though he held onto my hand. Soon, I gave up struggling, my eyes meeting his own as the tears ran down my face. "Interesting, very interesting," the man said in an almost fascinated tone. "Truly extraordinary." His eyes showed mere curiosity as they observed me, however I was more focused on the color of his eyes, blood red. Just like the models. Maybe he was her father, for he certainly had the same characteristics. The pale skin, the perfect features, the red eyes, yes, they had to be related. And the model had been nice to the girl Gianna, maybe he would be nice, too. As I met those red eyes, though, all of my thoughts fell apart. Menacing, haunting, those terrifying red eyes sent shivers down my spine, making me lose all thought of reasoning with him. "Please," I said sniffling, "let me go." As I spoke, I wiped off my tears with the back of my sleeve. However, it seemed to do nothing for the flood making its way out of my eyes. Never in my life had I been so afraid. I was afraid of the unknown. Of never seeing my family and friends again, of death. Those screams I had heard would haunt me for the rest of my life, which seemed wouldn't be much longer. "Marcus, Caius," the man called Arrow spoke softly, almost a whisper. However, in a few simple seconds 2 other men were by his side. I jumped back in alarm, but the man's iron grip held me. The 2 men seemed to be ancient, just like Arrow in front of me. Yet for all intents and purposes, they looked to be in their early 30s at the oldest. I didn't know how that was possible, but I couldn't decide exactly what they were. From the wrinkly skin, I would say they were older than my grandmother Marie, but yet they also appeared to be Charlie's age. On the right of Arrow, stood one with black hair. He was surveying me intensely, like he was X-raying me or something. The other, he actually appeared slightly uninterested, yet acutely aware of everything that was happening. "Brothers, this is," he looked at me questioningly, "B." Oot, for some reason my lips wouldn't cooperate. Maybe it was fear keeping them closed, or some sort of survival never talk to strangers instinct Charlie had forced into me. Either way I wouldn't speak. Now child, don't be like that. We aren't going to hurt you," Arrow said, shushing me as the 2 others widened their eyes marginally. It was a lie, I knew it. For that very reason, I simply shook my head side to side. My brown hair whipping across my face as it did so. "I am not going to lie to you. The man said, as though reading my thoughts. Pinky promise, I heard, as he held out his pinky for me to shake. Well, if was a pinky promise then it couldn't be broken, at least that was what Rebecca said, and Rebecca was always right. I am Bella, I said softly, Isabella Marie Swan. The more I talked, the stronger my voice got. Bella, I would like to introduce you to my brothers, Marcus and Caius. We are going to look after you for a while. As he spoke the brothers once again glanced at each other. Shock written into every line of their faces. Arrow, though, was smiling as he began to lead me down the hall toward what, I didn't know. Vaguely I could tell that the three brothers were whispering. Or at least doing something like whispering. At first, I had thought it was just a type of buzzing, because it was too fast for Met to actually pick up what was being said. Or maybe I was just in a state of shock. Swiftly, Arrow led me down the hall, but instead of going through the dreaded doors leading to the banquet room, we turned to the left, going down another, barely lit corridor. So, Bella, how old are you did you say? The man called Marcus asked me. 5, I said softly, but without a trace of fear in my voice. If Arrow had Pinky promised, then they wouldn't hurt me. So young, I heard him mutter, younger than both Jane and Alec. The four of us continued walking down the corridor, however, it began to get harder to see exactly where I was going. As the adults around me seemed to be able to see perfectly. My suspicions again began to rise. What are you? I asked the three of them in a mouse-like voice. I wasn't sure how this question would be taken. After all the signs I had seen, I had a hard time believing they were human. Apparently, the question was shocking to them, for immediately they three of them stopped. I turned around to face them, a puzzled expression on my face. It really wasn't a big deal. Was it? Even Keys, who had by far seemed the most composed, had a confused face. Arrow was first to recover. Whatever do you mean? The tone was polite, and suspicious. I just shrugged. You all don't exactly seem human. I told them honestly, for I couldn't find any reason to lie to them. Plus, it seemed pretty obvious to me. The red eyes, the abnormal strength, the amazing beauty, the pale skin. The cold hands, yes, there were a lot of reasons. You are by far the most interesting child I have ever met. Arrow muttered. I was an anomaly to him, obviously. For some reason, I thought he was going to say human, but had changed his mind. Yes, I was clearly onto something. And too observant for your own good. I frowned. Why weren't they giving me an answer? So are you going to answer my question? I asked them, slightly annoyed that I wasn't being told the truth. After all, I had been honest with them. All in good time, child, Keys said, patience is the key. Silently, Keys walked over and grasped Arrow's hand. Why was he doing that? It seemed a very random thing to do. Arrow, however, found nothing out of the ordinary with the action. After a moment, the man nodded. And Keys dropped his hand. All right, come on, little Isabella, we are going to introduce you to some people who I think you will like. Realizing I wasn't going to get my answer, I nodded. And we began walking again toward the door at the end of the hallway. For the next couple of minutes, as we walked toward the door I could barely make out, the only sounds were those of our footsteps. In fact, I was becoming tired. Now, I had had a long day and was ready to get some sleep. Did they have a bed I could use? Finally, we reached the door which Arrow pushed open easily. My eyebrows creased as I once again noticed that door should have been too large for a normal human to open. I wasn't a patient person. I wanted to know what secret these people were keeping from me, but I knew asking would get me nowhere. So, I contented myself to watching, and listening. Perhaps I could put the pieces of the puzzle together myself. Clearly, they weren't going to tell me what was going on. Bella, meet your new friends. Did Arrow have a speaking problem? That was twice now that he had stuttered during words, but he didn't exactly seem the type to forget what he was saying mid-sentence. Observation number 1. Looking around at my surrounds, I realized I was in a very modern entertainment room. Across the walls were shelves of every movie that had ever been made, it seemed. The walls, and shelves, were colored a purple, an odd color for a living room, but it seemed to fit. A large room, it was complete with a pool table, ping pong, and a giant TV in front of a scarlet wrap. A round couch with multiple plush pillows. Along the wall were scattered beanbag chairs, in a warmer shade of blue. All in all, I had never seen a room quite like this before, yet I loved it immediately. What drew my attention in the most, however, were the people inside the room. Gorgeous, models, beautiful, there needed to be a new word to describe the people in this room. Among them, I recognized Heidi. However, she was now wearing jeans and a normal shirt. With a quick count, I realized there were 7 people in the room, and all of them had their faces frozen on me. Never had I seen people remain so still, as they looked into my caramel eyes, taking in my appearance. Behind me, Arrow gripped my shoulders with his hands, reassuringly, as a gesture of comfort. Everyone, this is Bella, she will be staying with us for a while. Now the looks were being shot at him, questioning his sanity. Arrow, by your own law, children, one guy, who looked about 18 said from the corner, standing up. Arrow stopped him, however. Hush, Dimitri. The person in question nodded his head for Arrow to speak. Now, I will tell you all this later, once Bella has been able to rest. Again I heard Arrow do that mumbling thing. That sounded annoyingly like a bee buzzing lightly. Anyway, that applied to infants, however, Bella here, he paused again, looking down at me, examining my expression. She is different, I guess you would say. He finished lamely, as the others in the room raised their eyebrows, accenting the bright red eyes which plagued every face in the area. I suppressed a shiver as I looked at the sinister color. I had to admit fear was a prevalent emotion in me right now. Poor thing, another woman said across the room, standing to her feet. The child seems frightened beyond belief. Was I really that bad at acting? My emotions said yes, however I wished they didn't. In the corner I realized there was a girl, who looked to be about the age of 10, who was shooting daggers at me. Immediately I cowered in fear. I had a feeling she could be deadly when she wanted to be. Arrow, where should she sleep? Asked the woman again, as she traversed across the room at a quicker than human pace. However, unlike most of the curious expressions I had seen so far, this woman expressed merely sympathy. Take her to the East Wing, Chelsea, I have a few more matters to take care of. As Arrow finished he gave the rest of the people in the room a glance, making sure they knew they were not to be dismissed. Of course, Chelsea said quietly to Arrow, before turning to look down at me. Come on Bella, she said, holding out her hand for me to hold. Yawning, I complied and allowed her to lead me out of the room and down the hallway. Do you wish for me to carry you? I was asked by my new friend. Groggily, I nodded my head and was swept up into frigid arms, just like Arrow's. However, I didn't mind in the slightest, as I let the darkness of sleep overcome me, rendering myself to dreams once again. Blank, blank. Arrow's Pav. Once the young child had left, I looked to the remaining vampires in the room, all of whom were surveying me with questioning eyes. Foreseeing their questions, I held up a hand in silence. Now is not the place for this. In 20 minutes I would like everyone to be in the throne room where I will resolve this matter for you all. I spoke in an authoritative voice, showing the group that my word was not to be questioned. It was the same way I ruled the vampire world, my word was law. After I had said my announcement, I sped straight out the door, my black cloak billowing behind me in the darkness. Creatures of the night indeed. Behind me, I could hear Keys and Marcus following me, though they didn't seem to be trying to hide that fact. Instead, I stopped, knowing the two wished to converse with me. Brothers, I greeted them solemnly, as always. When one lives for thousands of years, it becomes difficult to speak mindless chatter. As such, we always skip the pleasantries. Arrow, Marcus and Keys said in response, their tone matching my own. Do I even need to guess what you wish to speak with me about? I said flatly, getting straight to the point. For we all knew it was the girl. The human girl, the likeness of which I had never met. Feeling slightly put out, I began walking again, knowing my brothers would keep pace as they talked to me. Sure enough, the 2 other pairs of footsteps began marching the moment I did. It is doubtful on whether we need confirm we are thinking the same thoughts, but either way I will make sure we are speaking of the same quandary, the child. Keys spoke the words, always the rational one. Yes, Keys, and is there anything particular you would like to ask? I asked, prodding him. The sooner this conversation was over, the better. For, after all, they would know everything eventually. Must I always explain everything to my brothers? Humans are not to know of our existence, Arrow. Marcus said, his tone sharp. Clearly he was not happy with this. I sighed, having known this was coming. This was Marcus we were talking about. Ever since Didymus, well, he had never been the same. He was always cautious, meticulous. Always making sure there was not a tiny detail out of place. In fact, most of the time he was more orderly about running our world than even I was, for I would sometimes bend the rules. I am aware, Marcus. I said serenely, after all I did make that law. Then why are you breaking your own rules, brother? Keys asked, exasperated. Of course, my brothers would not understand my intentions. But that wasn't completely their fault. No, I knew I would eventually have to explain my decision to them. After all, it was out of character for me. Because, the child Bella could become a great asset to the Volturi. But she is too young to be changed. I explained to them, unfazed by their aversion to my choice. It was my decision to make, and I had chosen to keep the girl, knowing what she could become. Now, where is that young Cullen girl when you need her? Perhaps she could be able to see how the child would turn out. Either way, the girl would be staying with us. For a moment, there was silence, as each of us became swept into his own thoughts. Until, then what do you propose we do, brother? Marcus asked, having calmed down from earlier. Finally, we were making some progress. Had you will have to see with everyone else. I said, chuckling slightly as I opened the door to the throne room. Inside, the vampires were gathered as I had requested, seated at chairs lining the walls. This hall sometimes functioned as our meeting chamber, especially since I could sit from my place on the throne and observe everyone. As soon as my brothers and I made our presence known, the faint chatter quieted immediately. As the vampires waited for me to speak, surveying the room, I noticed only Chelsea was missing, so she must have still been with Bella. I would, of course, have to speak with Chelsea later. I knew she would be invaluable in my plan to get Bella to remain here. Finally, when everyone began to grow impatient, I opened my mouth to speak. Eros Pav, sitting in multiple airs across the hall were the many members of the Volturi Guard. From left to right I could see them all looking at me, waiting anxiously for the meeting to begin. Surely the news of the human child had flitted through the castle. Meaning that many already knew what was going on. Taking my place in the middle throne from which I could precede the meeting, I was better able to take a look at certain faces. Jane, my pet, seemed very put out about this new development to our lives. She would most certainly put up a fight. However, I make the rules, it is for me to decide who or what resides in this castle. May I have your attention? Of course, the line I spoke was unnecessary, for all red eyes were focused upon me. Now, I believe many of you already know the reason I have called this meeting. But bear with me as I tell the tale to the others present. As I spoke, I realized one chair was empty, that of Chelsea. Most likely, she would still be with the child. Chelsea would most certainly be a key component to make sure that this plan could work out. Today, when our newest guests, the word rolled off of my tongue, came into this castle, there was one among their number which had a special importance to me. I found the child in a small closet off the banquet room. Apparently she had possessed some sort of skill to where she did not fall under Hyda's control. Slight murmuring began with those words. So, with judgment beyond that of a 5-year-old, she had hidden, hoping to avoid whatever she felt was coming. Remember though, this girl was human. As such her heartbeat and scent led me to find her. But upon grazing her skin, I discovered a most extraordinary thing. I paused here, letting this news sink in, creating anticipation among the crowd. Finally, I could not read her mind. Are you serious, Arrow? Asked Felix from among the crowd. Yes, Felix, I am quite serious. This girl possesses some unnatural quality which protects her mind from the likes of me. I waited for the chatter to settle down before I continued with my speech. As such, I have decided that the girl must become a vampire. I knew there would be a lot of controversy regarding the statement I had just uttered. 2. 1. Once everyone got over the shock they began their outcries. Arrow, have you completely lost your mind? Jane spat at me. Oh, very funny jest, Arrow. Dimitri said, faking a laugh. She is but a child. Felix was quite angered, as I had assumed he would be. Have you forgotten your law about immortal children? Heidi said, a tinge of regret in her tone. I had known she had always wanted a child. When I could take no more, I raised up my hands to tell them to stop. It was a cold silence which filled the room. I could practically touch the tension. I have no intention of turning her now, she is simply too young. Appreciative nods met my statement. However, when she reaches an age when she is old enough to understand, then I shall change her. Perhaps when she is 16 or 17, most certainly by when she comes of age. And until then, what is to become of her? Keys spoke now, waiting for my answer. I paused for a moment, for this would surely be the hardest thing to convince them of. I believe she should remain with us. In Volterra. No, she will not remain here. Keys said, standing up, outraged at this new development. Arrow, be reasonable. Keys, sit down. Marcus said, commanding. It was times like these I actually felt as if I was related to at least one of my brothers. When Keys had complied, he continued, Arrow, you know how dangerous it would be to have a child among us. His face was full of concern. Rather than reprimanding, peace, brother, I realize that. However, I believe there is simply no other option. I do not wish for her to live among humans, for then she would despise us after being changed. Marcus frowned, understanding that I did have a valid point. Besides, we are all well controlled, having been vampires for the past few hundred years. So, what exactly do you suppose we do? Chelsea said, making her appearance known as she waltzed into the room with the grace we all possessed. I turned to answer her question. We will raise her. I personally would Avenue no problem acting as her adoptive father until the time is right to change her. I had already become attached to the small girl, as I couldn't have children on my own. Chelsea nodded before hesitantly speaking up, Arrow, would you see any problem if I helped raise her as well? As she spoke, she twiddled her thumbs, a very human trait for nervousness. But of course, nothing would make me happier. I told her sincerely. One last question, brother, Marcus said, reclining into his throne. What exactly do you propose we tell the girl? That she is no longer going to be with her family, but rather with the creatures of the night. Oh yes, that would go over very well. Sometimes my brother could be a bit cutting. Well, that is where I hoped Mira would come in. As he spoke, he turned to a vampire in the side of the room. Mira, could you? In the corner, the girl raised her head ever so slightly and nodded after pondering for a moment. Thank you, my dear. And of course, Chelsea, I don't know if your powers will work on the girl. I said, now wondering how the last step of my plan would work out. Surprisingly enough, my powers did work on her. I attempted it briefly as she fell asleep, Chelsea said, affirming my hopes. I would Chelsea, Mira, and even possibly the Cullen girl. Perhaps I would call Carlisle later. In fact, Carlisle himself could be some help. Ah, absolutely splendid, I cried, clasping my hands together as the next piece of my plan fell into place. Well, I will believe that is everything then. Mira and Chelsea, I will speak with the two of you later. Other than that, you are all dismissed. And with that, I left the room, unaccompanied, my black cloak billowing behind me as I went to check on Bella. With my pace, it wasn't long before I reached the open corridor which held the child's room. Quietly as I could, I crept in, careful to make sure I didn't let too much light in. I didn't want to wake her. In the middle of the grand bed lay the girl, sleeping soundly under the pure white comforter. Gently, I pulled the covers up over her, tucking her in thoroughly. Good night, my daughter, I whispered, before exiting the room again, a shadow in the night. Chelsea's pav. After Arrow left the meeting, I traveled to the library, knowing that if anyone wished to find me, I would be there. I was always there. After being alive so many years, I discovered learning to be an amazing gift. I walked through the passageways, barely realizing where I was, having traveled these halls for so many years. Quickly, my thoughts turned to the small child now partially in my care. The same child asleep 4 floors above me. Warmth flooded me at the thought that I would get to raise her as my own. However, there was the simple problem of the fact that she was attached to her parents. Now, she was young, vulnerable, and naive. However, I knew it wouldn't take her long to notice that her parents had suddenly disappeared from her, leaving room for myself and Arrow to take their places. He and I both knew what must be done. I would have to take away any kind of emotional attachment to them. That way, while she would remember them, she would never wish to search for them, or ever wish to know them again. Though I knew it was wrong to take away her parents, there was no way she could be permitted to see them again, not with the destiny now awaiting her. In my musings, I failed to realize I was now straight in front of the library doors. In one swift motion I opened them, and danced into the room. For the next hour or so, I delved into the volumes occupying Volturi, while curled up in my favorite couch. At least until Arrow found me. Having very attuned hearing, I heard his footsteps approaching me. However, I waited until he was directly next to me before looking up. Arrow, I said curtly. For this was not a conversation I wished to have, however I knew it was necessary. Chelsea, he responded in kind. For a moment, neither of us spoke, until Arrow finally decided we had delayed long enough. Well, as you have figured out, I am sure, you must change Bella's emotional attachments, especially the ones to her parents. I nodded, I knew as much. Arrow, do you wish me to change the bonds to where she is now attached to us or? Arrow cut me off. No, Arrow responded, firmly, this was not an issue he would be swayed on. I, however, agreed with him completely, Bella should not automatically trust us. Otherwise there would never be anything other than a manufactured relationship between us. Very well, when do you wish for me to? Apparently, after reading so many of my thoughts, he could now anticipate what I was about to say, for again, he interrupted me. Now, if you would, while she is still asleep. Tomorrow will be a new day, tomorrow she will begin her new life as Isabella Volturi. As soon as I had agreed, Arrow departed, leaving me to gaze into the fireplace until I realized I needed to complete my task. Sooner than I would have wished, I found myself outside the child's room. Opening her door, in the center of the expansive bed, the little body was curled up underneath the snow-white sheets. I could see the rise and fall of the comforter as her tiny form took in small breaths. Her dark hair cascading down her back was the only part of her visible to me, as she was turned away from me. Silently, like a ghost in the dark, I crept over to her and began to run my pale white hands through her locks like a brush. As I moved my fingers through the strands, I began to release small inserts of my power, reaching for her emotions. I felt her happiness easily. It was almost overbearing how powerful her emotions were. Sifting through her emotional attachments, I found those for her parents, extreme as they were. Quickly, I severed them, as I had done to so many people, and pulled away. The job was done, it was over. Now Bella was officially a Volturi, she wouldn't know any better. Bella's paw. I woke up with the sunlight streaming through my window, and an unfamiliar presence on the foot of my bed. Sitting up, I rubbed my eyes groggily, before looking at the newcomer. After my eyes adjusted, I noticed it was the same nice woman who had carried me to bed the night before. Just like the many others I had seen, she had pale skin, and was extraordinarily beautiful. Her eyes were a deep red, yet they surveyed me kindly. "Good morning, Bella," the woman said excitedly. I looked at her cautiously, wondering why she was so happy. "Good morning," I said slowly, still debating on whether I could trust this woman. "What would you like for breakfast?" she asked me, moving from the bed to open the curtains. At this point I took a good look around the room, it was larger than any I had ever seen in my life. "Whoa," I said in shock, wriggling out from under the heavy covers to take a good look around the room. On the entire left side were flowing curtains, surrounding a single large window. Antique wooden furniture surrounded every inch of the room, sitting on top of the gray stone floor. Well, it was a castle after all. The woman laughed. "It is a bit overwhelming, isn't it?" "Who are you?" I suddenly asked, feeling it wasn't fair for the woman to know my name, but I didn't know hers. "Oh, I am terribly sorry, dear. My name is Chelsea," she said kindly, with a genuinely warm smile on her face. After a moment or two of studying her, I decided she was a nice person who I could trust. So I smiled back. "I'm Bella," I told her softly, though I knew she already knew my name. "Well, it's very nice to meet you, Bella. Now, what would you like for breakfast?" she asked again. Do you have any cereal?" I asked, blushing slightly. I didn't like it when people got things for me. "Yes, of course. What kind would you like?" "It doesn't matter. I don't want to be any trouble," I mumbled, shyly. "This is your home, Bella. Whatever you want you can have," Chelsea said sweetly. Something about that sentence didn't feel right. This place didn't feel like home. I knew for certain I had never seen this room before. When I thought of home, I thought of an old house, in a place surrounded by green. Two people stood out front, yet I didn't recognize them. I knew they were part of my past. But it was like they were just there, part of the background. I felt as much for them as I did for a tree. Apparently, though, this was home. This castle which I had arrived at yesterday. The castle filled with strange people like the one sitting before me. I didn't question it, though. For some reason, it felt like what she was saying was the truth. So, I didn't question her statement. "Well, if this is my home, can I meet all of my family?" I asked, not knowing who exactly my family was. Maybe those two people were part of it. No, they couldn't be. I pushed the thought aside. "I don't really feel hungry," I added, just in case Chelsea would ask again what I wanted. "Of course you can meet everyone. In fact, I think Arrow would like to speak to you," Chelsea replied. "All right then," I replied, before noticing my clothes. Chelsea, do you by any chance have?" I blushed. Oh, of course I have some other clothes for you, Chelsea said, before pulling me along over to a dresser, where I saw multiple outfits in my size. Take your pick, Chelsea said happily, moving out of the way for me to be able to go through them. I will go get Arrow, and when you are done we can all talk, Chelsea said as she suddenly waltzed out of the room quicker than I would have thought possible, fueling my suspicions once again. Bella's Pav. It has been over 2 years now that I have been living with the Volturi. Recently was the 2-year anniversary of the day Arrow welcomed me into his family and introduced me to everyone. 2 years since I became a Volturi. For the longest time, I didn't feel at home. But throughout the years I had opened up to them as they had opened up to me. Arrow had become like my father, and Chelsea had filled the role of my mother. Of course, I was the baby of the entire Volturi. Either way you put it. Jane was still a bit older than me, however she had become like my older sister, after a long time. I never knew why she treated me so rudely, or why she was always mean to everyone. Until I learned that her parents had never cared about her. All they had ever wanted was for her to disappear, marry some rich man and use the money for their own personal gain. It had taken a while before I finally confronted her, but she eventually had told me. She explained she was jealous of the love Arrow and Chelsea had for me, when she had been denied that as a child. I didn't understand how any people could do that, but at least I understood what had happened to her. She had been changed while she was filled with hate, the hate which manifested itself into her power of torture. However, we had come to an understanding which eventually turned to friendship, to a bond of sisters. Of course, in the beginning she had absolutely loathed me, at least until the day that I found out what the Volturi were. She thought they were putting an innocent human in danger, and, as much as she tried to hide it, she didn't want another human growing up thinking no one cared about her. At the time, she still had no idea that Chelsea and Arrow were still fully intent on becoming my parents. It didn't take long, of course, for me to figure it out. Between Felix and Dimitri, the secret might as well have been given up immediately, but Papa wanted to wait until I was older to tell me. He should have known I was too observant for my own good. The secret didn't last long before I knew something was up. I knew none of my new family were human. It was a month, however, before I truly found out. Though I wasn't exactly sure what they were, when I realized they never ate food, never went into the sun, and seemed way older than they were, well, I put the pieces together with what I had observed my first day. Plus it did help that I found a book called A History of Vampires in the library. For some reason Uncle Marcus didn't realize I could already read. By that time, I had already integrated into my new family. I loved them all completely, just as they did me. I was their little princess, as they called me, so it hurt somewhat when I realized they had been keeping something from me. However, I knew that there was a reason. They cared about me already. Just as I guess the people in my memories had cared for me before the day I came to my new family that day. That day was still a bit fuzzy, as though I had no emotions attached to anything before I walked into the castle. It was certainly odd, but I didn't really question it, just figuring I had been in shock that entire day. Anyway, once I figured out the secret, Papa Arrow sat me down and explained everything to me, how they were vampires. And all the apparent myths weren't really true. Unsurprisingly, I didn't find the information scary, as they had somehow expected, but rather I was just curious. So for the past few years, I had known the secret. The one problem was, of course, the fact that they drank blood. Human blood. Once I had found that out, I began crying, not knowing if I could handle that. For an entire 2 weeks I refused to talk to any of them, writing in a note that I would only begin speaking once they gave up their ways. There were many arguments, apparently, but in the end, I got my way. I told them that if they killed other humans, how did I know they wouldn't kill me? It was a good argument, especially since they cared too much about me to let me be killed. They had all become extremely attached to me, as I had become to them. I just couldn't imagine my life without them anymore. And so, with the rest of the family on a diet of animal blood, I once again joined into the family activities, such as movies, games, and other things that kept them occupied in their numerous years. Today, however, was a particularly important day. I would be starting school. Normally, I would have started a year and a half ago, but since Marcus and Keys decided to teach me themselves, we had to start a little later. Apparently they were off doing some type of diplomatic vampiric something. I didn't really understand. I just accepted what I was told. It had something to do with some war with the Romanians. I didn't actually know what they meant, so I didn't concern myself. Sometimes. I didn't think that my dad really liked me knowing all this stuff about vampires, but I didn't know why. Perhaps one day I would ask him. What reason could he have for me not to know? Besides the fact that I was, well, not one of them. An astounding thought struck me suddenly. Why hadn't I thought of this before? Were they going to turn me into a vampire? Walking over to the edge of my room, I plopped down on my princess-sized couch with my head in my hands. Did I want to be a vampire? I stared blankly at the powder blue wall, allowing my head to swim with the thought yearning to consume it. The immediate answer that popped into my head was yes. Of course I did. All of my family was vampires. I wanted to be one too. Maybe I would talk to Papa today about it, but I wouldn't want him to be angry at me. Knock knock. I heard Heidi's musical voice as she danced into the room. Unbelievably, I had learned she was actually a rather shy person, preferring rather to throw herself INTO shopping rather than actually communicate with people, or vampires I guess one would say. I had always guessed that when one became a vampire, they automatically gained a type of innate confidence. The confidence which Felix and Chelsea radiated, but in Heidi's case, she just said she became very good at acting like something she wasn't. I shook my head out of my thoughts to look up and smile at her. "Hello Heidi," I said to her as she waltzed to my closet. Typical. "So what shall you wear today?" I could hear the multiple rows of clothes moving around as she debated. I knew she spoke aloud for only my sake. As all vampires had a sense of hearing I could never understand. It was the little things, like this, that sometimes made me feel like I didn't measure up. Not by a long shot. They were all beautiful and perfect. I was just a clumsy, ordinary human with a knack for getting in trouble. "Heidi, all I need is a pair of jeans and a shirt, it's not like there is some grand ball coming up," I said, rolling my eyes as I pulled myself up off the chair and stumbled into the bathroom, tripping on a slightly raised slab of marble. Soon, the ground was rushing to meet my face as I put my hands out in front of me to stop the fall. However, two strong arms caught me as they wrapped around my waist. "You really are the clumsiest human I know," Heidi said, a twinkle in her golden eyes as she placed me upright on the ground. I stuck out my tongue at her before heading over to the sink for what I called my human moment. Rapidly, I brushed my teeth and washed my face, before turning to FACE whatever horror of an outfit Heidi had picked out. Even though I had a larger wardrobe than most fashion icons, I really was more content in my sweatpants and a t-shirt, which I had bought while with Dimitri of course. Neither Heidi nor Jane would have ever allowed me to buy them, having attempted to burn them multiple times. Dimitri, though, was like my protector you could say. I was, according to him, the little sister he had always wanted, one who needed him unlike any other vampire could. Vampires were pretty self-sufficient and hardly ever needed help. Or at least, that was what he had told me while we were playing a game one day. "Isabella," Heidi said, suddenly appearing straight in front of me, causing me to yell out, startled. At that she giggled. "I sometimes forget how easily you humans could be startled." Again with the human thing, was I really that different from them? The answer was in my mind immediately. Yes I was. I was a human, weak, innocent, and would never measure up. No matter how hard I tried I would always be different, fragile, and useless. "Bella, are you listening to me at all?" I heard Heidi said, shaking me slightly. "Of course, Heidi," I replied, attempting to appease her. "No you weren't, but it's okay," she said, smiling at me. "Here, wear this," she said, putting a pair of jeans and a regular t-shirt in my hands. I looked up at her with eyebrows raised. Was she seriously going to let me wear this? "Just go put it on, Bella," she said, rolling her eyes at me. Nodding, I hurried off to change before she changed her mind. Heidi never let me wear normal clothes. "Ready?" she asked when I returned. I nodded and we went to the library where I would be meeting Uncle Marcus. "Do you want to run or go at human pace?" she asked politely. "We can run," I told her, shrugging. "I just wanted to get there faster." "Running it is," she said, pulling me onto her back as we raced off to the library, ready for my first day of school. The end.